My name is Jeremiah. I've been a physics professor at the local university for nearly a decade now, though it feels like only yesterday I walked into my first lecture hall with a stack of notes, nerves in my stomach, and chalked dust on my coat. I've always taken comfort in numbers, in natural laws, in the predictable arc of a pendulum, or the beauty of a well-balanced equation. 3 years ago, I married Brooklyn, also a professor, but in the sociology department. We met at a faculty mixer, of all things. I'd always rolled my eyes at those events, but she walked in with this effortless confidence, her laugh louder than the jazz quartet they'd hired for the night. She challenged me, still does. Our marriage, while not perfect, what marriage is, has always had a kind of professional balance to it. She's driven, passionate, loves her students. I respect that. I love that we even share an office wall. There's a comfort in that too, knowing she's just a few feet away. But then something shifted. I can't quite say when exactly. Maybe it started in the spring when a guest speaker came to campus. One of those flashy names from the coasts flown in to talk about deconstructing systemic hierarchies within pedagogical spaces. Brooklyn insisted we attend. I remember sitting there trying to make sense of it all, but the speaker's words felt more like a sermon than a lecture. Half the room was nodding like they were at a revival. The other half, well, we were just trying to follow. On the walk back to the car, Brooklyn was animated, her hands slicing the air as she talked. "Did you hear what she said about invisible labor?" she asked, eyes glowing, about how marginalized identities are made to perform empathy for the benefit of the dominant culture. "I did," I said, unlocking the car. "Though I'm not sure what that has to do with teaching Newton's laws." She stopped walking, gave me that look, the one that says I've missed the point entirely. "Jeremiah, that's exactly the problem," she said. "You think science is neutral? It's not. Every system is built on bias, physics departments included." I opened. The door slid into the driver's seat and took a breath. I didn't want to argue. Not then, but a part of me bristled. I'd spent my life trying to remove bias, chasing objectivity. Wasn't that the whole point? Since then, things have only intensified. Suddenly, faculty meetings weren't about scheduling or research funding. They were about privilege, equity audits, decolonizing curricula, words that felt like code. Or maybe just words I hadn't bothered to learn the meanings of. Students started using phrases like problematic structures and epistemic violence when discussing exam formats. Someone accused the chemistry chair of gatekeeping knowledge. Another suggested replacing grading with collaborative evaluation models in the department lounge. I overheard snippets of conversation I'd never thought I'd hear on campus. "Did you read the open letter about Professor Harding's syllabus? She didn't even include a land acknowledgement. That lab assignment reinforces patriarchal hierarchies. I mean, who even needs to use force diagrams anymore?" Then came the emails, petitions, statements of solidarity. I skimmed them, unsure what exactly I was supposed to be standing in solidarity for or against. One day, a student knocked on my office door holding a Zen about radical physics. "Have you considered reworking your course to focus more on collective empowerment?" she asked. I stared at her. "My course is on classical mechanics." "Exactly," she said, as if that proved her point. I stood there confused while she had a smile, just like Mrs. Kamala Harris. Even at home, Brooklyn was different, more intense, more guarded. Our dinner conversations used to be about campus gossip, funny stories from students, maybe a debate over the best science fiction movie. "Now I'm thinking of adding a module on feminist standpoint theory," she said one night, twirling pasta around her fork. "It's important students understand how knowledge itself is gendered." I poured myself a glass of wine. "Isn't that philosophy?" "It's sociology, Jeremiah," she said sharply. "You'd know that if you actually listened instead of dismissing everything outside of your precious equations." I didn't respond. I just stared at the wine in my glass, swirling it like I might find an answer there. This morning, I walked into campus earlier than usual. The air was still crisp, and the quad hadn't filled with bodies yet. I liked that time of day before the noise, but even then, I could see the new banners strung across the library. Dismantle hierarchies, reimagine knowledge. Underneath, a group of students in colorful scarves and denim jackets, blue hair, were setting up folding tables, stacks of pamphlets, a sign that read, Campus Liberation Collective Weekly Teaching. Today, I adjusted my satchel, tightened my grip on my thermos, and kept walking. Physics doesn't lie. That's what I've always told myself. But lately, it's hard to tell what truths are safe to say out loud. And as I pushed open the heavy door of the science building, stepping into the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and linoleum floors, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something bigger than just academic discourse. It wasn't just the university changing. It was my life. I've been staring at my lecture notes all morning, wondering how I can talk about gravity without stepping on a landmine. I'm not joking. Last week, a student raised his hand, not during office hours, mind you, but in class, to ask if Newton's laws weren't part of a Eurocentric framework that perpetuates hegemonic narratives of force and domination. What am I supposed to do with that? I mumbled something about gravity being sort of universal, pulling apples down regardless of their historical context. But now, every time I prep a lecture, I'm second-guessing myself. Is the phrase opposing forces problematic? Should I call it a dialogue instead of a collision? It would be funny if it didn't feel so exhausting. But lately, it's not just work, where I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. The other night after dinner, roast chicken, which I still make on Thursdays, like some kind of ritual. I brought it up, the conversation I'd been avoiding for too long. We were sitting on the couch. Brooklyn had her laptop open, probably reading some new article about social capital in post-pandemic communities or whatever the topic of the week was. I waited until she took a sip of her tea and said as casually as I could, "Hey, have you thought any more about us having a kid?" She blinked. Her cup paused midway back to the coaster. "A kid?" "Yeah," I smiled, trying to soften the weight of the question. "I mean, we've been married 3 years now. It just feels like the next step, maybe." She didn't respond right away, just stared at the tea like it might give her a cheat code. Then she looked up. "I don't know, Jeremiah. I need to think about it more." "Sure," I said, nodding slowly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Well, I've been thinking about the implications. I mean, what it would mean for us, for my career, for my autonomy, for our finances. I might even want to conduct a study on how parenting affects academic women in dual-career households." I chuckled, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. Her eyes held that sharp academic seriousness, the same look she gets when she's peer-reviewing a journal article and finds a sloppy citation. "You want to conduct a study before having a baby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Why not?" She shrugged. "We do this with everything else. Why wouldn't we analyze something as life-altering as becoming parents?" I leaned back against the cushions, blinking up at the ceiling. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe a smile, a quiet yes, a conversation about baby names or what kind of stroller we'd get or what color we'd paint the spare room. But not at the dissertation proposal. And all I could think about was my parents, her parents. They didn't have in-depth discussions about social contracts and the intergenerational burden of raising children under late-stage capitalism. They just banged and boom, 9 months later there was a kid. Simple. Was it reckless? Maybe. But it was human. Now, everything has to be researched, cited, footnoted, and run through a panel of experts before we can even decide if we're ready to be parents. I sat there next to the woman I love, who once told me she wanted a little version of us running around. Now she's talking like motherhood is some sort of theoretical construct that requires fieldwork before implementation. The world is changing. Not sure if that is for the good. People on campus know me as the guy who teaches the laws of motion and makes his students actually solve problems instead of just nodding through PowerPoint slides. But anyone who's seen me in a t-shirt knows I wasn't always a lab coat and tweed jacket type. I'm a former NCAA wrestler. Cauliflowered ears, scarred tissue on my knuckles, and a nose that's been broken more times than I can count. I still train, Still spar when I can. Nothing crazy. I'm not out here trying to be the next Brock Lesnar, but I can go toe-to-toe with just about anyone in the gym, and they know it. There's something about physical discipline, grappling, striking, breathing through pain that keeps me grounded. When things don't make sense, I lift. I hit the mat. I kick the heavy bag until it swings like a pendulum. Newton would be proud. That's how I stayed sane. In the weeks after that awkward conversation with Brooklyn about having kids, she'd been distant ever since, burying herself in academic journals and committee meetings. She was always in analysis mode, asking questions like, what are the socio-cultural implications of traditional family structures? Or, are we really ready to reproduce? Without first confronting the environmental impact of raising a child in late-stage capitalism. Meanwhile, I'm over here thinking, lady, we've got a guest bedroom and health insurance. So I did what I do when life stops making sense. I trained harder. Early morning rolls at the wrestling club, kickboxing in the evenings. I kept my head down and my guard up. Then, one evening, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after our kid conversation, I walked in from the gym, drenched in sweat, hoodie clinging to me, gym bag slung over my shoulder. Brooklyn was at the kitchen table surrounded by open books, printed PDFs, her laptop glowing like it was conducting a TED Talk without her. She looked up as I dropped my bag by the door. "Hey," she said, like she just remembered I lived here. "Hey," I replied, grabbing a water from the fridge. "You eat?" "I'm not hungry. Figures." I unscrewed the cap and leaned against the counter. "What's all that?" She turned the laptop toward me, her face lit with the kind of academic fire she gets when she's close to a breakthrough or a takedown. "I've been reading," she said a lot. "There's a whole body of research around parenthood and the gender distribution of labor in dual academic households. Also, I interviewed 4 women in my department who had children within the last 5 years." She reached for a stack of notes, flipping through highlighted pages like she was prepping for trial. I also did a comparative analysis of tenure-track progress rates between mothers and fathers in academia. The numbers aren't good, Jeremiah. Not for women. I said nothing at first. Just stood there sweaty and silent, sipping my water like it might cool the building tension in the room. She leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. "I'm not saying no," she said, "but I needed to understand what I'd be stepping into. I needed to see it." And I came back. She paused, sliding a printed graph across the table like evidence with my own findings. I stood there, water bottle in hand, watching her shuffle through her papers like they held the meaning of life. Graphs, case studies, a citation about child rearing in Finland. I didn't come home looking for a policy debate. I didn't come home to negotiate the terms of fatherhood like it was a grant proposal. I came home looking for my wife, the woman I married, the woman who used to trace her fingers across my chest and whisper that our child would have my eyes. I set the bottle down. My palms were sweaty, not from the gym, but from the pressure building in my chest. She kept talking, something about disproportionate emotional labor and long-term career trade-offs. I wasn't hearing her anymore. I was watching her mouth move, but it was like the words were bouncing off a wall I didn't know we'd built. And then something in me snapped. I walked over to the table, shoved aside a stack of her notes, and slammed my hand down on the printed spreadsheets. The sound cracked through the room like a warning shot. She jumped. Her eyes met mine, wide, startled, but still holding that quiet, stubborn fire I'd come to know so well. "Listen," I said, my voice low, even but full of heat. "I don't need that crap," she blinked. "Jeremiah, no." I leaned closer. "This isn't a thesis defense. This is our life, and I'm done with the hypotheticals." Her mouth opened, but I cut her off. We either align with the goal or we don't. It's that simple. If you decide you don't want kids and I do, we've got a conflict of interest, not a disagreement, a fundamental rift. Nothing bad. 2 people can have a conflict of interest or have different takes on life. She stared at me stunned. I could see her trying to gather her thoughts, but I wasn't done. I'm not going to sulk through the rest of my life wondering what could have been. I'm not going to be the guy who gives up on being a father just to maintain a status quo that isn't even happy anymore. I stepped back, ran a hand through my damp hair, and exhaled hard. We've been married 3 years, Brooklyn. That's not 20. That's not impossible to undo. If this is where we diverge, then let's be honest about it. I looked at her then, really looked, and I saw the conflict in her eyes. I saw love, but also fear, hesitation, doubt, pride. I saw a woman torn between who she is and who he used to be. I took one last breath and said it quietly, but with finality. So tell me, Brooklyn, baby or a divorce? Brooklyn looked up at me, with those eyes, half pleading, half trying to stay composed. Please give me a week, she said, voice almost trembling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff and didn't know whether to jump or turn back. I didn't even flinch. Only a week, I said. And not to decide about a kid, but to decide about this. I motioned between us, your marriage. Then I turned around, grabbed my gym bag, and walked out. I didn't slam the door, didn't say another word. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but damn it, I wasn't going to keep getting strung along by research papers and secondhand fears from strangers with blocks. You want to base your whole future on what some woman in Finland wrote about regretting motherhood? Be my guest, but don't drag me down while you debate the metaphysics of a diaper change. My parents had 3 kids. My dad worked, my mom worked, they still made it happen. They're in Bali now, drinking cocktails, sending group photos of beaches and tan lines. Her parents, Florida, cruise tickets, retirement community parties. Life didn't stop because they had children. They lived. So no, I wasn't about to let some theoretical sob story from a stranger turn our entire future into a cautionary tale. The days that followed were thick with silence. We still passed each other in the house, mornings by the coffee machine, evenings in the hallway, bathroom lights flickering on and off as one of us finished and the other stepped in. A few "did you eat?" or "don't forget your umbrella," but nothing real, no warmth, just logistics and eye contact that never lingered. But I could see it in her. The panic, the pressure. She'd glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, like she was trying to read my mood or guess which version of me she might have to face. And when I caught her eyes, she'd quickly look away, chewing her lip, fingers fidgeting with her necklace. She wasn't sleeping well, I could tell. I heard her get up a few times in the middle of the night, shuffle around, pace, run the tap in the kitchen, probably reading or thinking or spiraling. Meanwhile, I trained harder, woke up at 5, ran, sparred, hit the weights until my arms shook, came home, showered, went to campus, lectured about entropy and vectors and cosmic inevitability, and every damn time I said the word gravity, I thought about her, how everything between us had shifted. Day by day, that week crawled by like a fuse burning low. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the distance, tired of the noise, tired of all the hesitation and overthinking. I didn't want to pressure her. I wanted honesty, real honesty, whatever the outcome. And then finally, 7 days after the night, I dropped the ultimatum. I came home from campus, opened the front door, and saw her sitting at the dining table again. This time, there were no papers, just her waiting, and I knew it was time for the discussion. We sat at the kitchen table. No candles, no food, just the cold surface between us. She was already seated when I walked in, hands folded in front of her like she was about to deliver a speech at a conference. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, arms crossed, bracing myself. She spoke first. "Jeremiah, having a baby is a big responsibility." I nodded slowly, already knowing where this might go. "I agree with that." She took a breath like she had practiced this. "So, we need to make sure that he or she gets the best chance at success in life. Not just emotionally or financially, but genetically too." I squinted. "Genetically?" She leaned in a little, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, let me give you an example. I blinked once. Here we go." She said, "In nature, the females in a herd of buffalo usually have one bull. One, the alpha. He's the one who mates with the females. It's not about fairness. It's about survival. The herd needs the strongest bull, so the calves have the best chance of being strong, too. I stared at her, not blinking now. And I've been thinking, she continued, eyes searching mine. Maybe that's something we need to consider as well. I mean, she paused. Maybe what our child needs is an alpha male. Silence. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just kept staring at her, wondering if I'd heard her wrong. She clarified. She actually clarified. I'm not saying you're not strong. You're incredibly disciplined, athletic, your background, your intelligence, your grit. But I think the world is evolving, and maybe there's someone out there with a better, more well-rounded set of traits. More emotionally evolved, higher EQ. Maybe someone who embodies the new definition of alpha. That's when I leaned back, slow and quiet, and brought my hand to my forehead. I just face-bombed. Not dramatically, not in anger, just like my brain needed a minute to breathe behind a shield of fingers. I stayed like that for a long second, breathing, processing. She kept talking something about how evolution isn't just muscle or height or fight. How the alpha today is someone who's emotionally fluent, politically progressive, psychologically aware. I didn't hear most of it. It was at this moment I realized that my marriage is screwed. I let the silence settle for a moment. Then I dropped my hand from my face, looked her straight in the eyes, and said flatly, "Define an alpha male." She blinked. "What do you mean?" I kept my tone steady. Exactly what I said. Define an alpha male. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. She shifted in her seat, bought time by brushing imaginary crumbs from her sleeve. Well, I guess someone who embodies strength, leadership, emotional intelligence? Maybe. I held up a hand. So now, emotional intelligence is a genetic trait. She frowned. No, but then how does having a certain political viewpoint impact genetics? I said, my voice sharpening. How? Do you quantify emotional maturity in someone's sperm? She was quiet. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. You're talking about choosing an ideal man based on abstract traits you can't even define properly. And you're trying to frame this like, it's logical, scientific, natural. It's not. It's you cherry-picking Buffalo documentaries and psychology podcasts and thinking you're designing a damn superhero. Jeremiah, I didn't say. No, you implied it. That someone else might have better DNA. That maybe I'm not the top-tier bull in this herd. She exhaled hard, clearly frustrated, but not saying anything. You want to talk about genes? I continued, still calm but relentless. Fine. Let's talk about athletic genes. Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player to ever touch a court. His sons never made it big, couldn't even crack the NBA. You think greatness automatically passes down through blood? She didn't answer, just stared at me, lips pressed thin. Let's go further, I said. IQ, the almighty metric of intelligence, right? Albert Einstein, arguably the greatest mind of the 20th century, his son Edward, diagnosed with schizophrenia, never made any breakthroughs, spent most of his life in institutions. Brooklyn looked away. So you tell me, I said softer now. How do you ensure anything when it comes to kids? How do you guarantee some perfect combination of strength, intellect, empathy, talent, and political awareness? What's the formula? She still didn't speak, just stared at the bowl of fruit in the middle of the table like it had the answers. I'll tell you the truth, Brooklyn. You can't guarantee anything. All you can do is love your partner, give it your best and raise the kid with care and conviction. That's it. I leaned back, heart pounding, staring right through her. But if you think there's a way to script out the perfect DNA and manufacture a flawless human being, then I need to know who you're really planning to have a child with, because it sure as hell doesn't sound like it's me. I paused, not out of hesitation, but to make sure the next line landed exactly how I meant it. You talk like you want to give our child the best chance of being the best of the best. I let out a bitter chuckle and shook my head. You know what, Brooklyn? I'm Professor. Jeremiah Williamson. I teach physics. I deal in laws that don't bend to feelings. I'm not Professor Damatonium in some cartoon lab dropping sugar, spice, everything nice, and a dash of chemical X to create perfect little superheroes. She looked confused, even hurt, but I didn't care at that moment. That's not how kids are, made. They're not assembled in a lab or curated like a Spotify playlist. They're made by people. Flawed, messy, stubborn people who commit to the mess and raise someone with love, not algorithms and theories from sociology papers. I stared at her dead in the eyes and said, "Listen, let me clear a few things up for you before we go any further." She shifted in her seat, already looking defensive, but I didn't let up. If there's going to be a baby, it's going to be you and me. Not some guy from a Disney fairy tale. Not some mythical alpha male who ticks your imaginary evolutionary checklist. No sperm donor. No side project. No ideology dressed up as science. Just you and me. Two people who took vows, who signed up to build something real. She opened her mouth to speak. But I cut in because anything else, that's cheating. Plain and simple. I don't care how many academic papers you quote or how progressive your friends think it is. If you want a baby that's not mine emotionally or biologically, then that's betrayal. Silence. I stood there breathing hard. So, either you make up your mind or I make up mine. And the way the silence stretched out between us, heavier than gravity, I already knew which way this was going. I stood up from the table, chairs sliding back across the tile with a screech that matched the tension in the room. I didn't slam the door, I didn't yell, I just walked out calm and heavy. And as I stepped out into the evening air, I knew that I couldn't come back from this. That the woman I married, this version of Brooklyn, wasn't someone I could raise a child with. Because if I did, if I ignored every gut instinct screaming inside me, I'd end up watching my own kid grow into something I didn't recognize. A rainbow-haired, gender-dysfunctional binary, confused, human, whatever you call it. I am not signing up for that. It was late when I got home that evening, later than I expected. The streets were quiet, and the house felt off somehow, like something wasn't right. My keys jingled as I fumbled with the lock, a feeling of unease crawling up my spine. I wasn't prepared for what I found when I stepped inside. I heard the sounds first, the distinct noises of a struggle, heavy breathing, and a muffled voice. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I just stood there in the hallway, frozen. The sounds were coming from our bedroom. It didn't make sense. I walked slowly toward the stairs, my mind racing, trying to process what I was hearing. There was no mistake now. The sound of sex. Not the kind of noise that should be coming from my wife's bedroom. Not after everything we talked about. My steps were deliberate, but I couldn't fight the pounding in my chest. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear more clearly now. There were no words, just heavy breathing and the unmistakable creaking of the bed. I didn't think, I just moved. I swung the door open. In my bed was Brooklyn, my wife, and Nathaniel Smith, the zoology professor. She looked up at me wide-eyed like a deer caught in headlights. Nathaniel froze too, caught completely off guard. My blood ran cold. I didn't care what they thought in that moment. I was already past the point of shock. My anger was building an uncontrollable storm I couldn't suppress. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice low but sharp, a knife edge of anger behind it. Brooklyn scrambled to cover herself, her face turning pale. "This is not what it looks like. You're naked. This idiot is naked and you were having sex with him. What else should I be thinking, Brooklyn?" I stared at her, waiting when she remained silent. It was like the last shred of any hope I had left for us disappeared. I sighed, unable to keep my anger in check any longer. "If you can't explain it, then my hypothesis is correct," I said coldly. Nathaniel clearly panicked, tried to move, but only got tangled in the sheets. I walked toward him, every muscle tense, every instinct telling me to act. When I reached him, I grabbed him by the hair, dragging him away from my wife's side of the bed. I held him by the neck and slapped him, multiple times on his face. He started crying like a girl. Is this your idea of an alpha male? I spat at Brooklyn. This weakling? This coward? Brooklyn stood there, her eyes wide with fear. Jeremiah, I don't. I cut her off, looking down at Nathaniel, whose face was filled with terror. Tell me, Brooklyn, what exactly does he have that makes him alpha? Tell me, because I don't see it. No strength, no willpower, and now he's crying like I slapped Nathaniel across the face hard. His whole body jerked, and he looked up at me with a tear-streaked face, still unable to form words. I punched him in the gut, watching him crumple in pain. Then, in the moment that felt like time itself had stopped, he pissed himself. The humiliation was written all over his face. I looked at Brooklyn, my eyes filled with contempt. No regards for my carpet as well. I was seething. Every fiber of my being was ready to erupt, but I didn't move. I just stared at Nathaniel and then back at Brooklyn. What quality does he have? I said slowly, almost methodically. That makes him an alpha male. Jeremiah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Brooklyn finally managed to choke out. I didn't care for her apology. It was too late for that. My eyes locked onto Nathaniel, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't a man of strength or courage. His entire body was shaking. He looked pathetic, pitiful. I turned back to Brooklyn, my voice colder than ice. So, this is the guy? The one you think is the alpha male you were looking for? She hesitated, but then she answered, He's emotional and understands me. He is really good with persuasion skills. In today's world, kids can only succeed if they are emotional to the feelings of the world and know how to convince people to think like them. I stared at her for a moment, stunned by the words that came out of her mouth. I couldn't believe this was the woman I married. Damn, Brooklyn, people like you should never breed, I muttered under my breath, disgusted by her reasoning. Then, without a second thought, I pulled out my phone. The words seemed to flow from my mouth in a detached, almost robotic manner as I filmed the moment. I'm here with my soon-to-be ex-wife and her lover, Professor Nathaniel Smith. I caught them red-handed in my own house having sex, and apparently, this brave alpha male can't even hold his bladder when faced with the consequences of his actions. I stopped the video and glanced at Brooklyn, my eyes hardening. This video will be shared with everyone who has a phone, every colleague, every friend, anyone who's ever known me or known you, unless you agree to my demands. She looked at me stunned, but she managed to croak out, "What a man's!" I didn't flinch. I was done being the nice guy. I was done playing the victim. I will file for divorce, and you'll walk away from this city. No alimony, no support, nothing. You'll leave and you'll take nothing with you. You'll also lodge a harassment complaint against Nathaniel. Get him fired and you'll make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I didn't raise my voice, but the finality in my words made it clear that there would be no negotiation. Do I make myself clear? Then, before I walked out of the room, I kicked that idiot in the nuts hard. I looked at Brooklyn and said, 1 hour, pack your stuff and be gone. I waited in the living room downstairs. I saw the two hurry out with the bags. After everything went down, I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Instead, I turned away and grabbed my phone, dialing the number of the only guy I trusted with stuff like this. "Ron," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Jeremiah. What's up, man?" "You sound off," Ron said, his voice cheerful like nothing could throw him off, but I was done pretending. I let out a breath. "Bro, she's been cheating on me. Caught her red-handed. Some guy from the university, Nathaniel Smith, the zoology professor." I paused, waiting for his reaction. It came after a few seconds, and I heard the sound of him laughing on the other end. "Jesus, man, that's something," he said, not even trying to hide the amusement in his voice. "Damn, I thought you two were solid, but that guy, really?" "Yeah," I said, feeling the anger welling up again. "Really? And now I need your help, man. I'm not doing this alone. You focus on keeping your head straight. I'll take care of things. This won't be a problem. We'll get the divorce rolling and make sure you're squared away." "Thanks, Ron," I said, feeling a slight weight lift from my chest. At least someone had my back in this mess. "I'll leave the rest to you." "Good man. Let me know if you need anything else. It'll be fine." "Trust me." I hung up, letting out a long sigh. I didn't know what was next, but at least the legal side of it was in motion. Now I had to deal with the emotional fallout, but that would come later. For now, I just needed to get away from Brooklyn and start figuring out the rest of my life. 2 days later, I was sitting in the kitchen staring at the papers in front of me. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, but it didn't bring the same comfort it used to. The phone rang in the living room. I ignored it the first time. A few moments later, it rang again. I grabbed it, not even checking the caller ID. "Hello, Jeremiah." Brooklyn's voice came through tight and tentative. "I got the papers." "Well, congratulations. You will be divorced soon." She sighed heavily. "I didn't want it to be like this, Jeremiah. You know that, right? You made your choice." "I made mine," I said. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if she was going to say something more, try to make one last attempt to fix things. But the silence stretched, and I realized this was the end. There was nothing left for us to say. "I'll leave." Brooklyn's voice broke through the silence. "I'll go. I won't fight this." I exhaled slowly. "You don't have to fight it. It's already over." After a few more quiet words, the conversation ended. 2 days later, Nathaniel left the city without so much as a word to me. I wasn't going to chase him down. I didn't need that closure. The whole mess with him with Brooklyn was over. I was done. And when the divorce papers came through, when everything was finalized in just 90 days, something inside me finally clicked into place. I stood in the living room staring out the window. The light from the setting sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. It was over. I'd finally done it. For the first time in months, I could breathe easy. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below.